welcome. You're watching QTV and you're watching the Week in Review. I'm Ari Darami, and this time to go through the stories with me is not my regular co-host Mamadou Mboj, but somebody whose first name is also Mamadou, but it's this time Mamadou Lamin Choi. Mr. Choi, welcome to the program.
Welcome to the program, Mr. Darami. It's a pleasure to be here and also to pretend to be Mboj.
Good. You'll have to say absolutely several times.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And viewers, if you're a regular viewer, you know what that is all about. The program, well, what is the program about? We take 10 big stories from the week and we go through them in detail. So we look at the State of the Nation address. We look at the acute kidney injury that's affecting so many children, and we go into the latest on that. We also look at the National Assembly and we hear about a conundrum that they had to try and solve. The commercial driver strike that has come and gone. And have we learned any lessons? Has anybody learned any lessons? Lots more besides those. Anyway, first story, of course, one of the big stories of the week was that His Excellency the President went to the Parliament, to the National Assembly, and he delivered his State of the Nation address. Have a look.
Significant in this address is the state of agriculture in the Gambia and government's policies to address concerns in this sector, which accounts for at least 19% of GDP.
Government plans to create a fund that will carry about 70% guarantee to the financial institutions for credit financing of agricultural investments by either individuals or SMEs. Hopefully, this will induce the needed capital to transform and modernize agriculture in the country.
Mr. Choi, there we heard your voice firstly and then latterly that of His Excellency the President talking about transforming agriculture in the country. 19% it contributes to GDP, significant. But we've heard this before. You were there. What more did you hear regarding agriculture besides the fund that we've just heard, that snippet about, that convinced you that perhaps we are on the road to modernizing agriculture in this country?
Thank you very much. I think it was quite important that it was featured in his address. But what he decided to explain or to bring in the State of the Nation address about agriculture, apart from that, was about projects that are being implemented by the Gambia government with partnership of development partners, agricultural organizations. And for me, quite very important initiative or policy decision of the government, which the President has just announced, to at least enable farmers access to finance.
A very crucial one,
which is very, very important. We've seen so many challenges. Agriculture is quite important for our economy, but what has been the problem has been for farmers is that there have been inadequate or lack of or the absence of access to finance, and seeing the government coming forward to bring in a new policy that will help them at least access to credits, but these credits also must be usually come with interest fees. And this interest at the end of the day one will expect to be affordable for farmers. But I think it's a very good initiative if it is implemented for the farmers in this country.
Okay, now I started with that one, but as you were there, as we all watched, there were lots of other things that His Excellency the President spoke about. But there were also, you spoke to some National Assembly members who felt that he missed an opportunity to actually address some very important matters.
Yes, the point for many of them, and when we had the President delivered his State of the Nation address, I think he was focusing more on the success of his government.
Of course, yes.
I'm not saying that everything was about it, but most of it was concentrated on what the government has done.
Sure. In fact, we even had that as our sub-heading. So, yeah, this was about the success of his government. Sure.
That's what he said. That at the end of his statement, he said, indeed, for us, it is a success story.
That's right.
So I think with COVID, with the Russia-Ukraine war, there have been so many challenges. We had from his speech, he delivered his speech, he mentioned certain public concerns like cost of living, you know, he mentioned about agriculture, he mentioned about employment, employment creation.
But he didn't mention transport.
Transport. He didn't mention transport.
Sure.
But these are areas that he even highlighted in his speech, but not in detail.
Not in detail.
That the public would have expected.
Sure.
At least there should be priorities in his statement that will address the public concerns, because this is not about what government has done, but it's about public concerns, present public concerns,
Sure.
and what is government going to do, what policies will be introduced
Sure.
to make sure for the longer term or the shorter term
Sure.
will be addressed for the public.
Sure, we could delve and delve and delve, but what you've just mentioned is an accusation made across the world when presidents deliver State of the Nation address. It ends up being less about the state of the nation and more about the state of their government or their governance of the country. So no change there.
Absolutely.
But thank you for that, Mr.
Thank you.
I was about to call you Mr. Mboch, Mr. Choi.
You wouldn't be wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. And now on to our next story. Now, not just in the Gambia, but other countries in our sub-region that depend on tourism to quite an extent have introduced various fees that people have to pay on entering and on leaving the country. What's unusual about the one in the Gambia is that even our tourism minister is not very happy about it. You don't believe me? Have a look, have a listen.
The ministry that implemented it has a reason of implementing in terms of security. Well, you go and find out. You go and find out which ministry implemented it. You will get to know. They have a reason to say we need this for security reason. But tourism, who are bringing tourists, would say it's not good for us. So government works like that. You have interlinkages that sometimes may not match together. It happens. But for us, for me, what concerns me most is not only about the cost, but the method in which the collection is done. You understand what I'm saying? If this was in the airport, it would not be in the air ticket, it would not be as visible as it is. So that's the position I have on this. You see, Sierra Leone have cancelled theirs. Sierra Leone have cancelled theirs. And these are all countries competing in the same market with us. You know, so we know that it's not good for our tourists.
There you heard the minister, and towards the end there, he said Sierra Leone had cancelled theirs. Sierra Leone introduced it quite recently. In fact, theirs was $25. And there's been a public outcry. There's been a social media backlash against it. Mr. Choi, you and I know, I said there's been a lot of discussion. There's even been some investigation, but it's quite unusual for the Minister of Tourism, of all people, to be quite so vocal about being against it.
Yes, this is a decision that is allegedly from the Office of the President.
Mm-hmm.
One would have thought that it would have passed through cabinet,
Sure.
the cabinet meetings, be done. But what I have seen, out of what I have read and heard so far,
investigation online,
is there's division in government.
Sure. Well,
in
I
terms
think
of
that
this.
the
And
reaction there.
The reaction from the minister. Which is the Minister of who is the Minister of Tourism,
Sure.
very key.
Sure.
And I have seen division in that. There should have been cabinet meeting,
Sure.
so that at least there's a consensus as to how to roll this out.
Sure.
My own understanding, perhaps it might have been conducted. I don't know. But with this, we have already seen that the Minister of Tourism has his butts about it.
He's come out quite
Yes,
strongly.
yes, quite strongly. And the issue here is, at least Gambia is a tourist destination.
Sure.
And we're competing with many African countries. And what is so special about us that we introduce things like this?
Sure.
Because you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, has had an impact on tourism.
Massive. Yeah.
Russia-Ukraine conflict, nobody would have thought and expected.
Sure.
It has had impact on tourism. So we are in a global crisis.
Sure.
And the means of earning, the income of tourists in Europe, Europeans are suffering, maybe not as equal to what not equal to how much we're suffering,
Sure.
but they're equally suffering in terms of their income.
Sure.
So tourists coming from Europe, tourists coming from US and other sources of our tourists in the country here. These are people who are struggling out of a crisis.
Yeah.
So now we are in a crisis, but still this security fee, for whatever purpose the government introduced it,
Sure.
will be at the disadvantage of the sector.
And I think you just touched on it by using that very phrase, for whatever reason they introduced it, because they've not explained it. And in fact, effectively, they've not even explained it to the Minister of Tourism, which is why he's so vocally against it. Is that part of the problem? the lack of communication or just poor communication about something that's as important as this?
Yes, it is a very big problem, because what I have read also, I've realized that even stakeholders in the industry, in the industry, the aviation authority, and the other stakeholders who have been interviewed, and they're expressing that a similar expression from the minister.
Sure.
The same thing. What would have expected that all these stakeholders will be brought together, and then maybe a survey be conducted, because this is a major decision. At least a policy must be well informed, because you don't bring policies out of the blue. You bring policies that are well informed, given the circumstances on the ground. So there should have been an assessment. There should have been stakeholder consultations, which would have at least advised government as to whether to go ahead with it or not. But I think that it didn't happen, and it is causing problems.
It seems it didn't happen. And what kind of complicates it even more is that in Europe, their summer, which is a proper summer, which is our rain season effectively, they've had the hottest summer. In some countries, the hottest summer on record. And so they've not felt the need to, I have to go to Africa to get some sun. I can get it in England, in Spain, in France, in Portugal. And so that is our competition. We're competing with what they call staycation.
That is why I've said what is so special about us, that we're introducing such policies or such project that will cost our tourists more than what they will experience in our competitors, countries.
Well, this is it.
Is the question.
And as we're saying here, is
Sierra Leone, the fact that Sierra Leone started it and then they stopped it.
Yeah. There was a complete outcry against it. I haven't heard people shouting in the Gambia, and this was the point I was going to come on to. We've mentioned that, and you've mentioned that stakeholders in the sector are not happy about it. The minister, do you think there's a possibility this might force them to have a rethink and possibly rescind it?
I think it should. It should. And by all indications from what we have been saying, I think government is trying to investigate about it. An investigation has been ordered into this, and inspired by the problems, the complaints that we're facing. But we are at where we are now as a result of not starting with the right process, taking due process, because I understand procurement laws, we have allegedly, broken. There were so many things that happened behind the scenes that the public, are not happy about, or were
so many things that allegedly happened.
Absolutely. So the investigations perhaps will reveal, and government will learn from it to take another, decision that will resolve the problem.
Thank you for that. And there's no shame sometimes in admitting you're wrong, but this one seems particularly unpopular. Thank you for that, Mr. Choi. Now on to our third story. Those of you who are commuters in the Gambia, you would have had a particularly miserable Monday on the 12th of September. There was a strike. It was meant to be indefinite, but it didn't seem to go on very long. Anyway, here was the most recent update about that strike. Have a look.
Esa Drame, the Director of Transport at the Ministry of Transport, Works and Infrastructure, said his ministry is committed to meeting the demands of the transport union, provided it is a fair deal for the public. He stressed that it is not justifiable to increase transport fares in a disorderly and chaotic manner where commuters are charged multiple fares for the same route. He therefore called on the General Transport Union to honor the agreed initiative of a pilot route licensing scheme as a strategy to eradicate multiple charging on the same route.
To our surprise, because, they came on Friday and then they met the Honorable Minister. And on Saturday, I think the press release was out that, they embarking on a sit-down, strike.
Mr. Drame there telling us. Now, Mr. Choi, this is a case of he said. You've had both sides, or different sides, I should say, blaming each other. On the other story, we talked about the lack of communication in terms of this. Is this, again, another sign of the lack of communication or poor communication, or is it something more?
Yes, there might have been poor communication. I wouldn't say lack of communication, because I can indicate that there have been meetings
Yes.
on meetings with government,
Yeah.
that is the Ministry of Transport and the General Transport Union,
Sure.
about the possible increment of transport fare.
Sure.
Meetings have been ongoing. In fact, that was one of them which I had to go and then
Yes.
decided that let me go and wait for the meeting to conclude, and I
Yeah.
will see what the outcome would
I
be.
remember it well.
Yes, that is an example that there have been engagement. Maybe
Sure.
maybe what is happening in this case is poor communication or inadequate communication
Sure.
between these two entities,
Sure.
and significantly has contributed to what we have experienced.
Sure, and one of the things that keeps coming up is that, as we heard from, that they're making demands of the ministry that are outside the ministry's mandate.
Yes.
So, Transport Ministry is not responsible for increasing fuel fares, or some of the other demands, not wanting checkpoints. And so, the Transport Union is making these demands, or alleging in some of the interviews they gave us that these were some of the, I think they had about 4 demands, that they were saying that if these demands are not met, then we're going on strike, and they did go on strike.
Yes.
But it seems a kind of lack of coordination, because
Yes,
you're negotiating with one person and asking for something, but it's not theirs to give.
Yes, I think that is why I did not say there have been lack of communication, but
Quite.
poor communication.
Yeah.
Because this is poor communication. You're communicating certain concerns and issues to the wrong person.
Sure. Yes.
Because the issue of petroleum, increment of petroleum prices or reduction or whatsoever, that is the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
In consultation with stakeholders, the
That's
Petroleum Ministry is also involved in that process,
That's
but the
right.
Ministry of Finance determines the price.
Sure.
And the issue of checkpoints and these things falls under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Interior.
Exactly.
Sure. Maybe the communication should have been try and engage government.
Sure.
Tell them that we needed a dialogue with you,
Yeah.
but we would have loved the Ministry of Interior,
This
the
is
Ministry
it.
of
Bring
Finance,
all
Ministry
the
of
stakeholders.
Transport,
Yeah.
all of them together and
Sure.
discuss
Sure.
what the problems are and see how best you can solve them.
Sure.
But by pushing forward all this list of demands to the Transport Ministry as one ministry, it will make it very difficult for them to quickly react and at least address your concerns.
Yeah.
Somehow also impossible for them.
This is it, yes, and absolutely agree with you on that. And onto the strike itself, I mentioned in the intro there, essentially it was one day, but we were told it was indefinite, and the one day that people felt it the most was on Monday. But on the Tuesday, it seemed to be crumbling, because I guess people started feeling the pinch in their pocket, and it seemed to be dissolving. In fact, I would go so far as to say by Monday night, those who had struggled to come to work struggled less to get home by that evening, because suddenly people were breaking ranks, the commercial drivers, and they'd started plying their trade again. So again, the union was saying it was indefinite, but the members seem to have taken it upon themselves to decide otherwise.
Yes, we are in a global crisis. It's not easy for anyone to sit in a day
Sure.
and not
And not
have anything or earn anything. And that is what we have seen. And for majority of the drivers, or for some of them, I wouldn't know, but for some of them, the vehicles that they use for taxis don't belong to them.
I hear it all the time from drivers.
Don't belong
that
to
is
them.
not mine.
In a crisis like
driver.
this,
Yeah, yeah.
I would have imagined if I were in such situation. Also, even though there are concerns or demands that will address our problem, our collective problem, but it won't be easy.
Sure.
There are push factors that will get drivers, because in this time around, what brought the difference? We've seen the buses. The government recently
Yes.
procured buses through
Sure.
the Q Group, and now those buses are plying the road.
And there are
and
competition
offering-
for
yes,
yeah.
there are competitions. We've also seen the Gambia Police Force also coming out. We've seen the tuk-tuk,
Yes,
those
3
Indian
those
cars,
tricycle ones.
yes, the
Yeah.
tricycle ones,
Yes.
coming out and indicating that we are not part of this
Yeah.
strike.
Sure.
So we are urging all our members to come out
Sure.
and do their work properly.
Yes.
So I think this is quite extraordinary, something we had not seen before.
Sure.
I think the union is lacking coordination and communication to at least hold grip
Sure.
to their membership. I don't know what their membership base is.
Yes, I mean,
I don't
and
know.
you've touched on another point. They did give us some figures. They said something like 43,000, which seemed a lot. But apologies if I'm misquoting here. But you've touched on something very important, the membership. The membership did not have an opportunity to vote for this. We were told by the people at the top of the union that the executive took the decision, and they took the decision on their own, and then they contacted members by WhatsApp and other means to tell them that we're going on strike. But there was no vote by the membership to say we want to go on strike, and that might be part of the problem.
I think you're trying to highlight what the standard is. What the standard is
Sure.
in a democracy, union at union level.
Sure.
There is democracy.
Sure.
So the executive cannot unilaterally take decision on behalf of the members
Sure.
without proper consultation
Yes,
or
and
without even vote.
And then say we're
What's
speaking on
taken?
their behalf.
And we're
But
speaking
how
on
do
their
you
behalf.
know? You haven't asked them.
How
Yeah.
do you know? You haven't asked them. I think, yes, lack of coordination
Sure.
and doing the right thing
Sure.
has caused this problem. And they should learn lessons from it. If not,
It
come
could
on,
happen
what
again.
happened?
Yeah.
I didn't,
You didn't feel.
at some point,
Yeah.
I didn't
You
feel
even
there
know
was even
a
strike.
Exactly. Exactly.
The same way I would travel to and fro
Sure.
is the same way even during this down strike.
Sure.
And I assume the same thing for some members of the public.
Indeed. Thank you for that. And it's nobody's saying they don't have grievances, but address them in the right
In the
manner.
right way.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Mr. Choi. Now on to our fourth story. Again, this is one I know you have a particular interest in, and I do, and I think anybody who's a parent, in fact anybody with human feelings, acute kidney injury. Several children have died here in the Gambia, and of course we feel it because we're a small country. So have a look, have a listen.
Most cases were reported from Western 1 and 2, the lower and central river regions.
It is a very serious problem when you have children dying in their tents in this small country, then it's a big problem.
As the investigation continues, samples of the drugs that the children took have been sent to toxicology labs in Senegal and Ghana for testing.
This situation, I will not say it is out of hand, but I can still say it is still not under control.
The fading voice of Ajibintu Drame there. We won't go into out of hand and out of control. That's another matter altogether. But I know, Mr. Choi, you are a young father, father of a young child. So as well as being a young man, you also have a young child. So particularly you must have felt it. But you also, from a professional standpoint, you have quite an interest in this case. And I just wondered, you have the latest figures and the latest situation. I know because on a daily basis you've been speaking to Ministry of Health officials. And I just wondered, your thoughts on what you heard and generally on the case.
Yes, the last time I checked and I spoke to an official at the Ministry of Health and Nephrology, is that there are 46 cases. There were 46 cases at the time of speaking to him.
Deaths?
No, 46 cases
Right.
at the Edo Francis Small Teaching Hospital.
Right.
Some of them were in critical condition.
Right.
7
Right.
were taken to Senegal.
Right.
Out of the 7, 6 died.
Right.
So those figures are from the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital. But how about other health centers? How about other hospitals? So many children are dying. Dozens have died. The mortality rate is 80 to 90%.
Sure. And as we speak, we've heard that an American team has arrived in the country.
Yes.
To assist.
Yes. So investigations started. I think the problem is that even for this laboratory analysis, we would go to Ghana, we go to Senegal. I think our surveillance system at least should be strengthened, such that when cases like this or when health issues like this occur, we would be able to quickly respond and then know what the problem is. So, but still we don't know what is the cause. What the ministry has said is that possible causes, linking E. coli strain and paracetamol syrup as possible causes, because in all these children that have tested positive for it, what is common is that E. coli strain and paracetamol syrup were found in their stool samples. So that is common.
Exactly, and the paracetamol syrup one, the minute people heard that, it raised various concerns. Parents who were used to giving it to their children were now
stopped.
We're now thinking, okay, are we being told to stop because it's the particular brand that I'm giving them? Or is it every brand or just a particular brand? The government and the authorities have not said it's a single brand. So people don't know. Secondly, people hear, paracetamol syrup and they think, okay, can you give us an alternative?
Yes.
Because if my child still needs something, what do I give the child? And we're not getting that, and I certainly haven't heard it. And as I said, you've been following this quite closely, as have I, and yet I've not heard that from the ministry that, there's this other alternative to just stop paracetamol syrup, and then that's it. What if my child is crying out? That's a temptation.
Paracetamol is very important for children.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, because of this, there is suspension.
Sure.
When would this suspension last? We don't know. And how much problem will it cause for our children?
Sure.
If my daughter is suffering from fever, in most cases, when you go to the hospital, that paracetamol syrup is part of the, it's part of what you are given. Sure. The treatment. So now that has stopped, I think there's so much atmosphere of uncertainty as to what next the people can do.
Sure.
Still, we were expecting the toxicology samples to come from Ghana to tell us what the problems are. And we've also received the American Center for Disease Control
team here.
Yes, they've arrived in Gambia to help in our investigation. So in the next few days, not in the distant future, we should expect clarity from the Ministry of Health to help the public, especially the young children who are the direct people who suffer from this, from the consequences of what is going on.
Sure.
But even the Child Protection Alliance also came out and then described it as a national disaster.
This is it.
They expressed concern and described it as national disaster, and urged the Ministry of Minister of Gender and Children to come out and launch an investigation. So I think.
Yeah, and before we go off that topic, as well as everything else we're hearing, the Medicines Control Agency, people have been directing criticisms at them, saying that if it is true that these medicines came in, were these medicines checked? Were they verified? Who verified them? How come they're being sold in our pharmacies and on the streets? And that raises another angle.
It's very sad. It's very sad that our country, Medicines Control Agency, is mandated to regulate the pharmaceutical industry, but they don't have a laboratory.
So
they don't. They only depend on documentations. Documentation from the WHO and from the factory.
Yes, and the supplier or the person who's importing them.
Yes. We'll have to bring certain documents which they will rely on to determine whether these substances or these medicinal products are good or not.
Sure.
So we lack that surveillance, strong surveillance system in our country. And the Medicines Control Agency, which is key in this area, I saw their statement, their reaction to the issue. I think they were the last to react.
This is it.
They were the last to react.
Yes. And yet people were looking to them to come out and say something.
The concern was raised since 28th of July.
Sure.
And by August, deaths have been reported. And since then, and we just received a press release from the Medicines Control Agency. I think this should teach us a lesson that we must, when we give institutions mandate, we should equip them to do the work properly.
And I think that's a whole other subject, but you're absolutely right on that. Absolutely right on that. Thank you for that, Mr. Choi. Now on to our fifth story, which will take us halfway to the halfway point, rather. I'm somebody who I've complained all the time saying, do we actually have a National Council for Civic Education? Well, apparently we do. And I see what stuff that I see around, I doubt it sometimes. But we caught up with them recently and we asked them similar questions about whether people know they exist, and if they do exist, are they doing their work? Have a look.
Mandated to, amongst other things, create and sustain awareness of constitutional democracy for the achievement of political, economic and social stability through civic education. The NCCE Programs Manager, Yusufa Bojang, says they are performing their duties effectively, despite little of this is seen by the public.
It is mandated primarily to sensitize Gambians, enlighten Gambians, educate them on their civic rights and responsibility. And since the establishment of the institution to date, this is what the NCC has been doing. And in doing this, we used different approaches, we used different mechanisms, different strategies to reach out to different Gambians, diverse communities, because depending on the type of community or the section of the community that we meet, we visit, we use different approaches to reach different people.
The National Council for Civic Education defending themselves and their record. Mr. Choi, as I've said in that intro, I'm one of those who I've been quite vocal about this, saying that it's all very well sensitizing people around the times of election about their rights and so on. But what about our streets, which are some of the filthiest you'll find anywhere? You know, what about our roads, which are death traps? Are those not also things that we need to be civically educated about? And those are the things that, you know, are costing lives. You know, whether you vote or not in an election, it's not going to cost you your life. But if an unhealthy environment can shorten your life because, you know, your life expectancy is reduced because of the filthy environment. The roads, as a whole other thing. So, as I said, they're defending themselves and they said, yes, we are doing this, but you've lived here longer than I have, and perhaps you've benefited from some of the NCCE's work. What's your view on this?
Yes. The issue here, what they should focus more on is to broaden their civic awareness campaign,
Yes.
to broaden it,
Sure.
because I think the focus has been on our civic and political rights.
For me, too much.
Too much on election,
Yeah.
too much on the constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, the constitution
Those
will
things
tell
are
us.
important.
They are very important.
But
they are very
there are
important.
other concerns, yes.
But civic education is beyond that. Civic education, patriotism.
Yeah,
Teach people what patriotism means. What is about patriotism? Because if you are patriotic, then you love your country.
Sure.
And when you love your country, at least there are so many things that you will avoid to do, which will jeopardize, you know, your country, which will tarnish the image of your country.
Indeed.
I think they're trying to do what they can do based on the amount of resources at their disposal.
You took the word right out of my, because I was going to ask that very question, but you've answered it.
Yes.
Is it because they lack resources? I think essentially you've answered that.
They lack. They might not, you know, usually government institutions, some of them, you know, we've heard from the Minister of Tourism, who was very blunt.
Right.
But some civil servants wouldn't be blunt to that extent.
No.
And they'll try to be diplomatic and win address issues. But I know that they have logistic problems.
Sure.
You know, they're facing logistic problems. I think where it should start is from our schools.
Sure.
It should start from
100%,
there. You know, their role is secondary.
Sure.
And the responsibility of the schools is to prepare our young people from that kindergarten to the primary, secondary. I understand that the Ministry of Education introduced civic as a core subject for all students. It's a very good education policy. It's a, you know, it's a very good move. Now, in fact, they're trying to even broaden it to you know, to involve peace building and all those things.
That's correct.
It is good, but what next? Did we train the personnel to be able to do that?
Sure.
You know, now they're trying to take teachers who were teaching government, teachers, different subjects. But I think the human resource, there must be capacity building, for human resources, the personnel to be trained on how to teach civic education rather than relying on those that had different training.
Sure.
This is the problem.
Big problem. Thank you for that, Mr. Choi. And that takes us nicely to the midpoint of this program, certainly midpoint in terms of stories. We'll take a break, and after the break, we'll have 5 more stories. Don't go away. Join us after this break.
Hello and welcome to US Embassy Gambia Today, a podcast brought to you by US Embassy Banjul. This weekly podcast will feature leaders and our partners in the Gambia. Join us every Wednesday as we broadcast these informative episodes from our American Corner studio at Africell in Bundung. We are on Spotify, Google, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcast. You can also follow the program on our Facebook and Twitter pages at US Embassy Banjul. US Embassy Gambia Today, bringing the Gambia and the United States closer.
As the fastest growing GSM company in the Gambia, QCell has the widest 4G plus coverage in the country, 3 times faster internet speed than our competitors. So switch now and dial *335# and enjoy what true 4G feels like. QCell, the Gambia's trusted network.
Welcome back, and I say welcome back to those of you who were with us at the beginning, and if you've just joined us for whatever reason, welcome to the program. And if you've missed the start of the program, you've missed 5 stories already, and to go through them with me I have friend and colleague Mr. Nearly said it again, Mr. Choi. I'm so used to saying Mr. Mboj.
In the beginning I told you I will be pretending to be Mboj, and you are right.
I think you should just pretend, and I'll just call you Mboj.
That's right.
But our viewers, thank you and welcome back. And now the 6th story. We have this story, and we have another one that has something to do with the National Assembly. But this one is about reporting National Assembly proceedings. Have a look.
You have a duty to be accurate and impartial in your reporting. You should also have the willingness to retract, correct, implicitly or explicitly apologize for misstatements. Crucially, in your writing, be calm and declarative. I conclude by encouraging you, the students, to put the valuable knowledge attained from the course to good use.
There we heard Judy Oder from Freedom House.
Nice.
And I chose that bit because she kind of sums up
everything,
what we want of those reporting. You and I were not there, but essentially you've reported on proceedings, and it's important, isn't it, to actually capture the essence of what is said and done in the chamber.
Yes, it is important for you to report about on National Assembly decisions. You need to understand the proceedings.
Indeed.
If you don't understand the proceedings, you are lost.
You come and report the wrong thing.
You come and report the wrong thing.
Sure.
Because National Assembly has proceedings governed by the standing orders.
Indeed, yes.
The standing orders prescribe the rule of procedure at the National Assembly, the behavior of National Assembly members. It governs how the National Assembly operates, but also in line with the Constitution. So, but if you don't understand the proceedings, you have a problem. And that is why this training is very important.
And it was on for 2 weeks, so it wasn't the usual 1 day, 2 day thing. This was 2 weeks of intensive stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So I would hope that with those 2 weeks of training, the participants would have been better prepared. But National Assembly reporting is very technical. It's technical.
Yes.
You are dealing with matters of very high public significance.
Yes.
They're very important.
Significance and interest,
And
because
interest.
it's not everything
Interest.
that goes on there that the public is interested in, but almost everything that goes on there impacts on the public.
Whatever,
So they need
yes. Major decision from the executive
Yeah.
will become binding only through National Assembly.
That's it.
Major.
Yeah, sure.
The budget,
Sure.
international, agreements,
Sure.
and so many decisions
Sure.
From the National Assembly. So when you report about National Assembly, you need to understand issues, you need to understand procedure and the proceedings of the National Assembly.
Sure.
And if you don't do that, there's no clarity.
Sure.
When you report, there is no clarity, you're
Sure.
confusing people,
Yes.
there are inaccuracies.
Sure.
So this becomes the problem.
Because you could hear a National Assembly member get up and saying something that's quite catchy or attention grabbing. Fine, don't just report it. What's the context in which he or she said it?
What is the context?
That is all part of what the training was all about.
Absolutely. Which is important. There are so many, stories one can get from the National Assembly, but only when you understand, the procedure. Reporters also must have been trained going beyond the decisions taken at the National Assembly. As media practitioners, we must be there as watchdogs.
Sure. Thank you for that. Time is fast catching up with us. And thank you for that, Mr. Choi. Now, seventh story. This one is a brief one. We hear this thing about people going on the so-called back way, the irregular migration route. And sometimes we hear of those who it didn't turn out so well, and they came back and they became a success story here in their own country. Have a look, here's one.
It's normal to me because Manmajel Bagwe, what I see in this Bagwe, maybe if I told you, it's gonna be more heart-touching, what I feel, I myself. So if you see me back in Gambia talking to you, doing poultry farm, say, Alhamdulillah, I could have died. So I know what I see there, I know, and I face what I got the experience, I know what happened through this Bagwe.
Ali Njai there, speaking to our colleague Ansumana Sonyasi. Choi, I deliberately chose that one, something that you and I have talked about, this so-called back way, and the fact that sometimes people actually don't look at opportunities here in the Gambia. Now, had he not gone through the bitter experience that he did, he wouldn't now be involved successfully, has to be said, in poultry farming. And we need somebody like him to be an example to other young people, surely.
Yes. Because what is important in life is a long learning process.
Sure.
You have to keep learning every day. The best teacher is experience.
Indeed.
And he experienced the back way. He knows what is there.
Sure.
And now he is back to reintegrate back to society and do something.
Yeah.
Because for me, I believe if you cannot make it here in the Gambia here, it will be difficult for you to make it anywhere else around the world.
Yeah, sure.
Because you must be ready to face the challenges facing the socio-economic
and
dynamics
you need a kind
of
of,
the country.
exactly. There's a certain mindset that you have to have, that you can make it anywhere because you have the right mindset. And you shouldn't imagine that, if I cross the sea, I will suddenly have that mindset and I'll be able to be successful, when you weren't displaying that here. Yeah.
There are many opportunities in the Gambia. The problem for most young people is to have it easy, the easiest way.
Sure.
Shortcut to success. And by trying to build shortcut to success, you cause trouble for yourself. And this is why many young people are dying on the back way, trying to make it to Europe. So there are many opportunities. Yesterday, I attended the Youth Connect. I saw entrepreneurs there, and they gave me so inspiring stories. Some of them who are very young, who started their business, although there were challenges, but now they have come to a point that they are employing people. So the issue is not about going to seek employment to make it in other countries, but what can you do in this country to develop yourself and your country forward?
Thank you for that, Mr. Choi. As I said, not much time. But which takes us nicely onto our eighth story. Again, I said we would come back to the National Assembly. This one was one that kind of set a precedent. Some people said a dangerous precedent. There was a bit of a conundrum, a bit of a dilemma in the National Assembly. Here's a snippet.
Neither the Constitution nor statute law deal with the issue of what happens to parliamentary business including the passage of bills when the National Assembly is dissolved. However, it is generally recognized in jurisdictions based on the Westminster parliamentary system that Parliament ends with its dissolution, and when Parliament is dissolved, all incomplete or unfinished business of Parliament is terminated.
In the previous assembly, there were several bills tabled by government for consideration, many of which are still pending.
A voice, a familiar voice there telling us the story, your own voice, Mr. Choi. Now, despite Fabakary Tombong Jatta, the Speaker, quoting what happens in parliaments that grew out of a similar experience to our own, he went against the convention, and he somehow said he wanted to localize it, give it a kind of local context, and go against what would happen in other jurisdictions where the success of Parliament is not bound by its predecessor.
Yes, this is quite a decision, a decision from the Speaker, and it's quite controversial because some National Assembly members wanted at least a democratic process to take its place.
Sure.
There were no voting. What happened was the chair of the Standing Orders Committee rose and on a point of order. But what I have observed is that these have already been predetermined.
Sure.
Predetermined in a sense that when he rose on a point of order at the National Assembly, the statement had already been prepared by the Speaker.
Sure.
And that was what he read.
This is it, yes.
And for major decisions like this, one would expect National Assembly members to be allowed to debate on what to do, given the available parliamentary convention in the Commonwealth jurisdiction.
Sure, because when we discussed this as we were watching it in the office, some people were saying, well, what's wrong? Why can't they carry on? So I said, well, I'll give you the example. In a democracy, theoretically, everybody who was a National Assembly member the last time could have lost their seat. And you've got a fresh set of National Assembly members. Why should these people be bound by something
that was decided by the other parliament?
The other parliament. And that is where, and that's why the convention that's been adopted, where it is terminated, that's where that arose from, the concept that potentially everybody could have lost their seat, and yet he went against that, as you said. It was contentious,
decided to contextualize it in our own context.
Sure.
But the convention is that when Parliament ends, its legislation, the bills pending legislations are terminated, and that's the end.
That's it.
And that convention should have been followed, or we try and see how best we can adjust our standing orders and our laws
to
fit the purpose.
Thank you for that. So even though he's made his ruling, I suspect it won't be the last we've heard of it. I think people were very disgruntled, and they may try and raise it in some other context, but thank you for that. And now on to our penultimate story, peaceful transfer of power in Africa. It's not the kind of thing you normally hear about, but there's been one that has been a shining example recently, and others are thinking, can we emulate this? Have a look.
But one country, Kenya, has defied the negative trend following an election dispute that was settled by the nation's apex court. Now ex-president Uhuru Kenyatta had endorsed his longtime rival Raila Odinga over his vice president, the victor and newly sworn-in president William Ruto. Kenyatta's political decision to back his one-time rival over his own vice president is one many analysts struggle to understand, given the pair's good relationship during their time in office, especially in the build-up to the presidential election. For many in neighboring Tanzania, where election violence, harassment of opposition supporters, and internet blackouts during elections are becoming the norm, Kenya's election is one to admire.
Now, I chose that story deliberately, and in fact I asked our colleague to do that story because a particular bias. I became aware of how they were reacting to Kenya's election process and the results in Tanzania. The newspapers the next day in Tanzania were all saying, why can't we be like Kenya? Why does there always have to be violence? Why can't people take the decision if they want to challenge it rather to court rather than to the streets? And that's not just a Tanzanian thing, it happens across Africa, and so it's really refreshing to see Kenya, surely.
Oh yes, I think there's so much to be learned, because even though Raila Odinga did not concede defeat, did not accept the result, but a due process was followed.
Sure.
He went to the court, the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided against him, in favor of Ruto.
Sure.
And officially confirming the result from the IEBC. So this is the rule of law, and this is democracy that we must nurture, and then we must abide by for peace. And what is quite ordinary is that even though Raila Odinga did not agree with the Supreme Court's decision, he respected it.
Sure.
He respected it. He never called out for violence. He never called out for protest. He never called out for anything.
Sure.
And secondly, also, the president, the outgoing president, was not in support of Ruto, but we've seen how peaceful the transfer of power was.
Although I think even Raila Odinga accepted defeat more readily than Uhuru Kenyatta did, because imagine Ruto was once Kenyatta's vice president until recently, until this election, and yet it took him 5 days before he congratulated him. And Ruto made the joke when they asked him at a press conference why he said, well, he's a busy man. Maybe that's why he hasn't congratulated me. But on the serious point, it is something I told, and Mr. Mboju normally sits there, I did say to him when we were discussing this, I said, I'm excited, but I don't want to get too excited, because just one incidence of this happening, and in a positive way, in Africa, we shouldn't imagine. We would love for it to happen, because it's become the norm for elections to be disputed, including Yahya Jammeh right up to the time he had to leave. In America, elections have been disputed the last 3 or 4. So yes, in Africa, it usually turns bloody, it usually turns violent, but this time, thankfully, it did not. So
peaceful. It ended peacefully. In fact, the outgoing president was at the inauguration, and the manner of which they comported themselves.
The body language was good.
The body language was good. I think we have so much to learn from this, even though it is not always the story on the continent. It's one of the few examples that we should learn and move forward as a continent of democracy.
And let's use it as a textbook to be taught. Particularly, I like the fact that the Supreme Court, immediately after the 1 hour and 43 minutes of the Chief Justice reading the report, said, we are making a special version available for the media, and they did that. Fantastic stuff.
I hope that our judiciary learned from that
we
too.
hope they learn from it. Thank you, Mr. Choi. And that takes us nicely onto our final story, the TRRC recommendations. Yes, they have still not been delivered upon, and yet some people are trying to hold government to account and making sure that they do so. Who's doing that? Have a look.
The Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Honorable Sidin Jai, and Hussein Tomasi, the Solicitor General, welcomed this engagement. While the Deputy Speaker reminded parliamentarians of the importance of their oversight function to this process, the Solicitor General says government has already initiated several programs, all geared towards implementing the recommendations in full.
Implementation of the TRRC recommendations is by no means a small feat. It is pivotal that we understand that this is a process that will take years to achieve within the tenets of democracy and rule of law. As such, effective parliamentary oversight is required throughout the implementation process.
We only have a couple of minutes, and I can be accused of many things, including maybe I don't manage time well on this program. But I choose the inserts for a particular reason. I chose that one because I wanted to make the point that he made there, that this may take years.
Absolutely.
Surely a message that needs to be got out.
Yes. Because there are many pieces, before government can take action on so many issues about the recommendation, it has to pass through Parliament.
Exactly.
And it has to pass through Parliament, parliamentary bill process, all these things. It might take so many years, the Parliament also providing oversight on what government is doing next. So these are things that really take so much time.
Exactly.
Also the courts too.
Exactly, and I was saying in an earlier story about context. The context is what you've just touched upon. It has to go through Parliament, and that was a session involving the Human Rights Commission, some NGOs, including the victim centers, and parliamentarians, saying these are your obligations to ensure that this thing is delivered upon.
So it's not only about government, it's not only about the executive, it's about all the three arms of government, the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. So three of them must work together to deliver this. The blame must not be only on one if there's a problem.
I think that's a brilliant point on which to end, Mr. Choi. And I would like to thank you, and I only called you Mr. Mboj once. And thank you for not reaching us and slapping me for that.
No,
but
it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Viewers, as ever, thank you for watching. As always, we're really pleased that you do tune in. Until the next time, goodbye.